Okay, what if I told you there's a detailed blueprint for the future, and then it was written down thousands of years ago? Today, we're going to unlock a really specific view of end times prophecy. We'll explore the logic that holds the whole thing together, and maybe most fascinatingly, why its followers are convinced it's all mathematically precise.
So the entire premise we're digging into today, it really starts right here. The source material we're looking at argues that a kind of confidential, really detailed briefing on future events was given to just a select few people. And this wasn't some vague prediction. It supposedly laid out a precise sequence for everything that was to come. And well, that leads us right to the central question for this whole explainer. Is it possible that this ancient briefing actually contains a key, a master key, that, if you understand it correctly, could unlock a precise timeline, a timeline that maps out not just the past, but the future too?
All right, so to find this key, the source points us to one very specific, very ancient text. And this isn't just presented as some old historical document. No, it's treated as the foundational document for this entire prophetic framework.
And where is this key, you ask? Well, according to the source, it's been hidden in plain sight this whole time, right there in the Old Testament in the book of Daniel. We're talking about a text that's over 2,500 years old.
Okay, so let's get into it. What exactly is this key? Well, it's a very specific passage, one that outlines a timeline with what the source describes as just astonishing mathematical precision. So yeah, let's break this down.
It's called the 70 weeks prophecy. Now, right away, we have to get this straight. These aren't weeks of days like we think of them. They're weeks of years. So 70 weeks actually equals 490 years. And the prophecy is really clear that this whole time period is decreed specifically for the nation of Israel and its destiny.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. You have to pay close attention to the structure here. The source emphasizes that these 70 weeks, they're not consecutive. They don't just run one after another. Instead, there's a countdown for the first 69 weeks and then a long, unspecified gap, an interval. Only after that gap does the final 70th week begin. And let me tell you, that interval is absolutely crucial to understanding this whole timeline.
173,880. Okay, what's with this number? Well, according to the source, this is the number that changes everything. It's what absolutely galvanized the author's belief in this prophecy. It is the precise number of days calculated for those first 69 weeks, the 483 prophetic years.
So how in the world did they get to that number? It's pretty specific, right? Well, the source starts the clock with the historical event, the decree from King Artaxerxes to rebuild Jerusalem way back in 445 BC. From that exact date, it counts forward, one day at a time, for exactly 173,880 days. And where does it land? April 6th, 32 AD. And what's so special about that day? Well, according to the Gospels, that's the one day Jesus rode into Jerusalem and publicly presented himself as the Messiah, the King. You can see why this claimed precision is seen as such a powerful validation of the whole thing.
Okay, so with this key now in hand, this 70 weeks prophecy, the source then begins to construct a really detailed map of future events. It builds out an entire prophetic timeline based on this structure.
And this timeline lays it all out beautifully. You can see it right here. The prophetic clock for those first 69 weeks starts ticking in 445 BC and stops, bam, in 32 AD. Then the timeline enters that long interval we talked about, which is called the church age. According to this view, the very next major event on the docket is the rapture. That's when the church is removed, and that's what restarts the prophetic clock for that final 7-year week, often called the tribulation. And that period culminates in the second coming. The source gets really specific about what happens during this final 7-year period. It kicks off with a kind of global covenant or treaty enforced by a world leader. Then right at the midpoint, the 3.5-year mark, this key event happens called the Abomination of Desolation, which is described as a major desecration of the temple in Jerusalem. That event initiates the second half, the last 3.5 years, which are called the Great Tribulation, and it's also known as the time of Jacob's trouble, which really emphasizes that, for this view, the focus is squarely back on Israel.
Now, as you can probably guess, not everyone is on board with this specific timeline, not by a long shot. And the source material itself is quick to acknowledge that there are major debates. But it argues that all these different views, they all stem from one single, fundamental disagreement.
And here it is. The crucial point is this. All the fierce debates about the end times, they're not really about dates or events. At their core, they're about how you interpret the text itself. It's about your starting point, your interpretive lens. because where you start ultimately determines where you end up.
So the source basically breaks it down into two main camps. On one side, you've got a literal interpretation. This is the "it means what it says and says what it means" approach. Prophecies are expected to be fulfilled, well, literally. On the other side, you have a more allegorical interpretation, which sees many of these prophecies as symbolic, representing spiritual truths, not necessarily literal future events. And it's really important to get this. The viewpoint we've been exploring is built entirely on that literal foundation.
And that literal approach leads to another critical distinction. This view holds that God has separate, distinct plans for two different groups, the nation of Israel and the church. They're not the same. So that 70 weeks prophecy we talked about, it's seen as belonging exclusively to Israel. The source argues that when you start to blur the lines between those two groups, that's when you end up with completely different end times timelines.
And this is how all those different interpretations really play out when it comes to the big question, the timing of the rapture. You can see the main views here. The pre-trib view, that's the one we've been detailing, places the rapture before that 7-year period even begins. Then you have the mid-trib view, which, you guessed it, places it in the middle. And finally, the post-trib view, which says the rapture happens at the very end, basically at the same time as the second coming.
So after all that, what's the ultimate takeaway? For people who hold this pre-tribulational view, what's the big idea? Well, it all boils down to one single powerful concept, one idea that really shapes their entire perspective on what's to come.
And that concept is imminency. According to the source, this isn't just some minor detail you can take or leave. No, it's presented as the non-negotiable cornerstone of the whole argument. It's what makes this specific timeline totally unique.
So what does imminency actually mean? Simple. It's the belief that the rapture is the very next events on the prophetic calendar, and that it could happen at literally any moment. No other signs have to happen first. No other prophecies need to be fulfilled. It's always, potentially, right around the corner.
The source points to verses just like this one to back up that idea of imminency. See, the call here isn't to look for signs of a future tribulation. It's to watch and pray always, to be ready to escape all these things. The implication is that you need to be in a constant state of readiness for an event that could come without any warning at all.
And ultimately, this brings the entire, really complex blueprint right back down to a very personal, very present-day question. For believers who hold to this timeline, the focus shifts. It stops being about just predicting the future, and it becomes a profound challenge for right now. It becomes about this one question: how should you live your life today if tomorrow is not guaranteed?